Good evening, comrades and friends. You're all very welcome this evening to another programme with us, and we're delighted as always to have panellists Tommy McKerney, Paul McGoldrick, and Barry Murray from the Pat O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum, who come in to analyse and to give, an anti-imperialist overview of topics and items that we discuss, whether that's geopolitical matters or matters to do with things that are happening here at home in Ireland. And this particular Zoom, while it's last minute today, just we decided to run with it, was inspired by Stephen Roach. You're very welcome, Stephen, who actually, in a conversation with myself, filled me in on an action that happened last week up in Galway. So that's why the title of this evening's programme is called, it's about activism in Ireland and looking at the potential for revolutionary change. And it really has been inspired by numerous conversations that we have had. We actually started off over a year ago with a very important Zoom with many very important guest speakers. If you remember, Stephen, you were there, and it was about protesting, marches, are they making any difference? And here we are, over a year later again, although the topic is slightly different. We're not just talking about weekly or monthly marches now, we're talking about activism broadly. So before I invite Stephen in to speak about the particular example of last week's action, Stephen, I'd like to invite Tommy to maybe give a little bit of historical context to activism in Ireland and how it has looked in the past, how it has evolved, and even what it looks like today. Tommy, thank you.
Thanks, Roisin. I think this is quite a complex discussion. There's no simple answer to it. There's no one solution fits all. We've got to take into consideration the circumstances. And a few things I think I have to keep in mind, that activism has to be part of a coherent campaign. We've got to know what we're doing and where we're going. And the fact remains that not to dismiss, I think we've got to be careful not to dismiss what is the type of action that marching, demonstrating, because it's essential that there is widespread understanding of what we're at. Because if we're eventually attempting to overthrow the current system, capitalist system, we're going to need all the support we can get. And the fact remains that it's not an easy task. It's not something that's going to be achieved overnight. And something we've got to always keep in mind is words from an expert in the field, the expert in this field, Vladimir Lenin. So never play with insurrection. Never play with it. You've got to be very careful what you're doing. So that's lesson number one. The fact then remains, of course, that to sit passively or to think that you just march around in circles, singing songs or chanting, that's enough to transform society. It's not. But I've got to be careful about the type of activity we're dealing with. Now, let's take something from the past. An organisation that I sometimes refer to, although it had its limitations, that was the IRB, the Fenians. The Fenians started at a time when really were driven by the famine, and they realised that the answer to the famine was to take, as they learned in France, that it was important to take control of the land, to distribute the land away from the aristocracy. To do so, that you had to take out the king, to take away the monarchy, that you had to establish a republic. But as part of their campaign, they involved themselves intimately with the Land League, set up a Land League by the Fenian Michael David, and had an immense impact. Now, obviously, they didn't succeed eventually in everything they had set out to do, but they had a huge impact, and it built up a reservoir of support for an independent republic, not necessarily a socialist republic, but an independent republic, which was overthrown by counter-revolutionaries. But it's something we have to keep in mind. Support. Now, when we're talking then about activity, I think let's go back to where we started here. In my lifetime with the housing action campaigns in the north, in Derry and in Dungannon and County Tyrone, and at a time when it seemed almost impossible to generate support. Hard work was done. People worked hard in Derry City, in Dungannon, County Tyrone, and eventually they took direct action in Caledon. But it took some time before that proved fruitful. But the fact that they had the courage to take action in Caledon led to civil rights marches. But there was widespread support and involvement. I think that's the thing that we've got to keep in mind. Without that widespread support, without the involvement, and beyond the direct involvement, we've got to have widespread sympathy and understanding of what's going on, which is very important. Because when it comes to, and I'm not, let me be very clear here, I'm not advocating a resort to arms. It may come that it'll have to happen, but if we do, but we're not advocating armed insurrection. We're talking about class taking control. The thing then is that to do so, you have got to have support, active support from the people. And beyond that, there's also what's known as benign neutrality, something that people that are not actually involved would at least will not stand in your way. And that's very important. So there's a complexity here that can't be addressed with one or two simple solutions. There are a number of things that have to be considered. How do we interact with the needs of the people today? What do we do to support them? We don't run off with isolated incidents, one-off incidents, maybe one incident, of course, that'll spark several others, but we've got to do it. But to keep in mind that we've got to answer the needs of the people, that we have to work very hard to do it, and keep in mind that without support, without popular support, now there's a difference between populism and popular support. Popular support for a change in society is essential. Populism is something totally different. Popular support. Without popular support, there's very little chance, no chance at all of transforming society. So it can be a long and laborious process. And someone said one time, you can't book a revolution, you've got to work for it and be organised and know exactly at the end of the day where you want to go. Now, my view is, and I'm sure this is the view of most of us, all of us here around this table, we're talking about at least a workers' republic, the socialist republic of the workers' republic. That has to be then laid out during our campaigns. The ultimate objective, just as the Fenians laid out, their ultimate objective was not home rule, it wasn't dominion status, it wasn't to become West Brits, it was to become an independent republic. And when they advocated that through their campaigns, made it clear to the people when they were working with the Land League that the only way to secure freedom for the small farmers and the peasantry was to establish a republic. It had become accepted. So we've got to say too that when we're talking about housing, we're talking about health, we're talking about education, we're talking about workers' rights, that while we have certain issues to campaign for today, to take whatever actions we can, but the ultimate objective, the only time that we will secure that totally is within the Workers' Republic. So I hope that's been helpful.
It has indeed, Tommy, been very helpful and looking at activism in its broadest sense. I suspect that most people who've come to tonight's programme will be coming from the place of some people being new activists, new to because of what Palestine has done and opened up a crack, you know, and allowed us to see the nature of imperialism. But I suppose something that occurred to me, Tommy, when you were talking is that you know, you're looking at the ultimate or the long-term goal that we have, and that would be a workers' republic. But are we assuming, you know, can the fact that right now the big movement in Ireland is for Palestine or anti-genocide? I suppose what we're starting to see is that while most people, I would say, are beginning to realize that that's an anti-imperialist, you know, our actions are anti-imperialist. I'm not convinced that everybody's even at that stage, Tommy. So the idea of working towards a workers' republic might even seem a little bit abstract. Would you agree with that?
Well, I agree that it can be abstract for many people who have decided to march to support Palestine from human empathy and decency, and we won't dismiss that. I've got to recognize that too. But I think, in the course, that's where the responsibility lies on those that have the insight, that know the cause of what's happening, that we don't accept some half-baked analysis that it's down to the bad, the badness of Benjamin Netanyahu, that there's an imperialist agenda at work here, that the imperialist agenda is to have a garrison, effectively a human garrison in the Middle East to secure the imperialist objective. Now, that was a thing that might have been very difficult to teach people or to enlighten the population before the outbreak of hostilities and the onset of genocide in Gaza and Palestine. It has to be possible now to educate people much more convincingly. So, but it's up to us that have that insight to convert, or not, well, convert sounds possibly too suave.
To translate it, at least.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, to interpret what's happening for people. But we have the task of bringing it to their attention. But I mean, yes, of course, there is the problem that some would hold back from criticizing the United States, would hold back from criticizing the European Union or the British Empire for what support they're giving to imperialism, essentially, that's happening in Gaza. But let's take some consolation from the fact that, for example, today we saw the election of Catherine Connolly to Arsenukdra with over 900,000 votes from the people. And she made it very clear that she was very opposed to the actions of the European Union, imperialists in the European Union, imperialists in Britain, and imperialists in Washington. And at the same time, she was vilified, or attempted to vilify. There was an attempt made to vilify her by the establishment and the media, but it hasn't succeeded. So let's take some heart from that, but build on that now to further the enlightenment, so that people do. And we've got to also keep in mind that there is if you like to use, there's a GRA in Ireland for the oppressed. We have been through this before ourselves. We know what colonialism is. We know what settler colonialism has done to us. I mean, I don't talk about settlers in Israel. I talk about the plantation of Israel, which is an ominous phrase coming from our own experience. So that gives us an understanding of what's happening, and we can build on that. So it's something we've got to do. But I think we retain optimism in the fact that people voted for Catherine Connolly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tommy. Yeah, it's an important historic day today. Anybody who's tuned in or been looking at, it's been on RTE all day, the inauguration, and it's made the news. So yes, it's a good day in that sense. I'm going to switch over to you, Stephen, because you're the you're the root cause of this program.
Been accused before, yeah.
But I'm not going to talk. For the sake of those who are here who don't know you and don't know what happened last week, if you could even just give us a narrative, the narrative of what happened, and then we can take a wee step back and look at it more analytically.
Sure. Thanks, Roisin. Yeah, so it was last Thursday in the University of Galway, the DPP, so who's the Ireland's chief prosecutor. She heads an office with, I think, roughly 200 staff, and their job is to basically prosecute all criminal cases and decide which ones are worthy of prosecution throughout the state. And she was invited on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of that office, which is a good question. I think that role was created out of the Attorney General. So the Attorney General used to be both the legal counsel for the state and the Director of Prosecutions, and then they split that role 50 years ago. Anyway, she was invited to the University of Galway. I found out about it a day earlier from somebody who's involved in an activist group called Your Tech is Their Death. And I also found out for the first time that her office had just a week earlier renewed a cybersecurity contract with an Israeli firm called Checkpoint. Now, Checkpoint is a straight up cutout of the Israeli military. I mean, it doesn't even really hide that fact. There's so many private companies that aren't actually private companies that are fronts in one way or the other, but this one is, I don't think they make any bones about it. The founders were from the signal tech unit of the IDF called Unit 8200. The current CEO is a former brigadier general, which is the highest ranking officer in that unit. So they're essentially a fully fledged member of the Israeli military apparatus. And the idea then that some of the most sensitive data on Irish citizens, which is namely all of the evidentiary data around criminal cases for everything from, everything from road traffic offences right up to murder, anything to do with also connected to protest, connected to activism, that this is all passing through the servers in Tel Aviv. And given what we already know about Israel, what Israel does with data, how Israel is completely impervious to any sense of international norms, not obviously preaching to the converted here, but it's beyond irresponsible. It's essentially criminal behavior to renew a contract 2 years into a genocide. So this was the context. And the idea was there was an event that you've probably heard of a couple of weeks ago where Brian O'Driscoll, the retired rugby player, was giving a talk in Dublin in the Westbury Hotel. And that was also connected to this company, Checkpoint. And some activists very successfully disrupted. It actually got quite a lot of media attention in the mainstream media, and it was quite an embarrassing egg in the face moment for O'Driscoll. But to the one on Thursday was a little different because O'Driscoll is obviously a kind of a well-known and well-loved figure in Ireland, but the DPP is one of the most powerful figures in the Irish government. So it's on a kind of a different scale. And so the question then was, what do we do at that event? So I reached out to some people I know in the Galway Palestine Solidarity Group, and quite a few people were interested in attending. I wasn't sure if it would just be, I was willing to go and disrupt and get it recorded and essentially just use it as an opportunity to name and shame and draw attention to the fact. Again, I myself had only just found out, but of course we're all uncovering all the time. Thought that was a really good point as well that Tommy made earlier that, I honestly don't think Catherine Connolly would have been elected 2 years ago because I think her comments about the EU probably would have sunk her with the Irish electorate. But I think people have woken up that much. So there's so many revelations have come to light. Anyway, but because there were so many people attending who were pro-Palestine, the consensus was that we should, and also because the event was billed as a kind of a discussion with moderator followed by a Q&A. So the fact that they had built a Q&A into it, we thought, okay, we'll use the Q&A. So we'll use the Q&A to put her on the spot. And the idea also being that since they have agreed to a Q&A, they're kind of obliged to give some kind of a response. Whereas if you disrupt the meeting, they can always say, you're just being disruptive and refuse to engage at all. So we sat through about an hour of this, an hour and a bit of her discussion with the moderator. It was all incredibly collegial is the best word. I mean, it's what the thought that came to my mind at some point was that this law professor who was interviewing her was essentially kind of hoping for a job down the line or a recommendation or to somehow, there was nothing even remotely challenging. Now, the thing was billed as an insight into the office of the DPP. Okay, so it wasn't necessarily billed as a kind of a grilling of her, but nonetheless, you'd imagine that, especially from people with a legal background, there'd be a bit more substance in terms of critique as well of the DPP's role. There was nothing like that. So when the Q&A finally rolled around, I knew there were a few of us ready to ask questions. Now there was the Checkpoint issue, but there were also a couple of people who wanted to ask about the prosecution of activists in Shannon. There were 2 cases just last week that were before the district court in Ennis. And there are in total, I think, 4, if not 5 cases before the courts. They tend to drag them out. But this, again, as far as I understand, is still kind of under the brief of the DPP. So she has the power to dismiss those cases or decide. So the first questioner asked specifically about the about the checkpoint, and was very, very civil, was very respectful, and just laid out the fact that, you know, you have just renewed this contract. Are you aware that you've just renewed this contract, and what does this signify? And left it open and said, can you please comment on this? Okay, so a more gentle phrasing. I mean, I don't think I would have had the kind of the restraint to put it so gently to her. And I'm just going to read for you, because I did record it. And I'm going to read for you exactly what her response was. It's shockingly inarticulate, but leaving aside the inarticulacy, it's also incredibly disrespectful to the audience. So what she says is this: I'm not really, to be honest with you. So she's asked, are you aware of this? I'm not really, to be honest with you. I don't know that, but certainly cybersecurity is really, it's really critical for us. So like if there was a question around like moving around from a particular company to another company, that would have to be looked at in the context of what else is available that's equivalent, because like cybersecurity at the office is really critical. To be honest, I don't have enough background to be able to give you anything more than that. This is our top legal flippin' eagle in this country. That's more a sparrow than an eagle, if you ask me. It's a one-winged sparrow. I mean, just the inarticulacy alone of that reply. I mean, she's clearly, well, she wasn't expecting it. Okay, so she was flustered, presumably. But you know, you should be ashamed of yourself. And if anything, the moderator should have at that point stepped in and asked her to, gather her thoughts and come up with something a bit more coherent. Anyway, he didn't. She didn't. The next questioner asked about the Shannon situation, and she just said, no, I cannot comment on individual cases. And that's when I asked for the mic, and I said, okay, you can't comment on individual cases, but could you just give us a general? Because there was so much palaver in her whole talk beforehand about how, public service, and about her kind of commitment to the principles of transparency and what was the other one? So there was transparency, like she must have repeated it about 3 times, and accountability. So I asked, in the name of transparency and accountability, could you just tell us, in general terms, what the interest of the state is in prosecuting non-violent activists, particularly people protesting against a clearly criminal activity. In that, I mean both the use of Shannon Airport and the Israeli genocide. She just said, I'm not answering specific cases. So that's when it turned into a little bit of kind of got a bit shoutier, because I said it's not a specific case. By this stage, I'd given up the mic, so I had to raise my voice. And I went back and forth. I have it on video. I can maybe share it with Roisin at some point, and you can put it up. It's not all that interesting. It's just what was really striking was that she just said, when I said, we're not asking for a specific answer. We're just asking for a general comment on the interests of the state, because that's something that she had talked about earlier, was that she would only prosecute if there was a legitimate interest of the Irish people in a prosecution. And she just said, and I swear to God, it was like her tone changed, well, I'm not answering it. As if that's that. So not a whole lot more happened beyond that. There was one other person asked a question about, she asked again about the use of Israeli tech companies by the ESB. I think it's Checkpoint as well. correct me if I'm wrong there, Roisin. And of course she said, well, that's beyond my. So 4 questions related to Palestine and not a hint of an answer to any of them. Not even a kind of a, you'd imagine in a situation like that, especially when you're dealing with the general public, that they'd kind of interpret a little bit something of what you like, throw you a bone of some kind, basically. And so there were no bones thrown to us. And then there were a whole bunch of questions. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that I was shut down by another member of the audience who's it turned out afterwards, because I went down to talk to her, another law lecturer at the university, who essentially took the mic and said, we've heard enough from you. You've had your chance to speak. And I insisted that she hadn't answered the question, and it went back and forth. So it was kind of semi-disruptive, but not properly disruptive. And that's how it ended. There were several questions then from kind of what seemed like local, either law professors or barristers, solicitors, on legal issues. It was all very collegial. It was all very unchallenging. And then the whole thing wrapped up. And I had a little bit of a back and forth at the end with this law lecturer. I actually wanted to have a word. I went down to the front, but I think they were afraid I was going to, I was going to do a Luigi Mangione on it or something. Anyway, they were kind of, they huddled around her. And then I ended up talking to this law lecturer lady for another 15 or 20 minutes. It was all kind of a little bit pointless and circular. But what really came out from it was that it kind of stripped the veil away, I felt, on this, what was essentially a PR exercise. They were using the university in this public setting and the fact that it was open to anybody as a way to demonstrate that, our highest public legal officials are accessible to the little bit like the Dáil Public Gallery, but, you're supposed to know your place. But then at the very end, I had a little kind of unexpected encounter because I went out. There was a kind of a refreshment desk. I was standing there unrefreshed and talking to one of the other pro-Palestine people who'd been there, and the DPP comes out, and she comes out on her own, and we're just kind of like from here to a couple of feet away from each other. And I just nodded at her, and she was a little bit shook. She looked a bit shook, and because the other lady had accused me of being aggressive, I just thought I better say something. So I said, look, I'm sorry if I came across as aggressive, but I was just frustrated that you didn't answer my question. And that was very interesting change in her whole tone and demeanor. She just looked me straight ahead and she said, I didn't come here to answer those kinds of questions. And that was for me, was like, ooh, okay. And I said to her, okay, I didn't realize there was a list of approved questions. And that was the moment for me when the whole thing kind of, the kind of pointlessness of it, the pointlessness of engaging on their terms became apparent, because she had no intention of, no matter how we had phrased it, no matter what we had done, no matter how much homework we had done, no matter who we were, she wasn't going to answer a question on Israel, on activism, you know, and in a way the university colluded with her in allowing her that, because they were the ones surely in a situation like that who should have held her. The moderator, if he was doing his job, should have, asked her to give, respond in some way. So that was the evening. Yeah. It was a bit of a wet squib. And yet, for me personally, it was also very revealing. I wrote a piece about it afterwards, which I shared with Roisin, which is how this came about. And I'll probably publish it somewhere in the next while, just to kind of, because for me, that final little moment kind of crystallized the whole thing. We were there not really to protest. We were there actually to kind of, as an exercise in accountability, in public engagement, but we weren't on any kind of a level playing field. The game was rigged from the start. So the question is, would it have been better just from the start to have disrupted the whole thing, to have shut it down, to prevent her speaking at all? Of course, we would have been accused of, stifling free speech. We probably would have been accused of preventing her from answering legitimate questions. But again, it's about knowing your enemy or knowing your adversary. And that's another point for me that became clear is these people are very much our adversaries. They're like her, she is like if she's, there's two possibilities in terms of the checkpoint contract. Either she's genuinely ignorant of it, and there's something about the mumbling incoherency of her answer tells me she wasn't. She was too rattled. There wasn't a hint of curiosity in her in that moment. It was pure kind of panic or unsureness, unsure footing. So let's assume she isn't ignorant. She knows about this, so she's okay with it. So she's okay with handing over our data, and she's a lawyer so she's aware of the implications to a hostile foreign power, a genocidal foreign power. Yeah. Anyway, I rest my case.
Thank you, Stephen. And I think it's important to get that narrative so people have context, before we start to launch into an analysis of what activism looks like in Ireland today. I know that everybody gathered here, I suppose, expresses their activism in different ways and mightn't engage in the way that you have, Stephen. There's lots of ways to be an activist, and people are in different stages of the journey as well. Some people just starting out, some people um, um, much only starting out today, thinking I better do something. This genocide's going on a bit too, or this war is going on a bit too long. Maybe I should do something. And then people are a lot more advanced and people with a lot more experience and maybe personal experience too of imperialist oppression in their lives, depending on our circumstances even in life. But I'm going to come to you, Paul, if you don't mind, and then Barry, because we're looking at, so that's an example of activism today. This is Stephen has narrated a story, but looked at, even and a couple of things there. Checkpoint, this is really cyber company who's taking care of our data that's in the hands of the Irish state for prosecution. Never mind all of that. In your view, Paul, through an anti-imperialist lens, who benefits in this current order? And in who is benefiting when we seek transparency and when we seek accountability? Is there any such thing? Can we engage in this way? It's like, writing to a politician or writing to the government and saying, I seek clarification or transparency, or we're trying to hold these people to account. Is it possible in the current system, under the current capitalist system?
Well, suppose, Roshan, there's no magic recipe. And suppose why does people become involved in activism? There's numerous reasons. Some people even said, allude what Tommy talked about earlier, populism. Other people because it's maybe organised self-interest. Again, even say Palestine, they see it as the right thing to do, the humane thing to do, whatever. But we can't, suppose, you can never dismiss activism, but on the other hand, suppose activism without a revolutionary theory is merely just basically reactionary. So that's why it's imperative that we have the theory, and that's why I suppose it's imperative that more experienced activists are on the street, engaging with people and explaining them and communicating with them and suppose educating them along the way. But I suppose like even there what Stephen was talking about earlier, like I'm sure that's a great learning experience for Stephen. It's like even the courts, the civil service, the police, whatever, like their sole purpose, and even they call them public servants and whatever, but even this whole thing around the genocide in Palestine, that is exposing, suppose, the status quo. And even there, and there is popular support for, suppose, a new Ireland, even as you say, as you've alluded to with the Catherine Connolly being elected, no matter about all the smear campaign that was against her. So like, and with all these with judges and whatever, like they are subservient to the ruling order, which is capitalism anti-imperialism. But like activism, like even say from my own experience as a youngster, why I would have got involved in activism was probably through basically republicanism. But then and then along the way you learn, it brings you into something else, and you start to be able to join up the dots in your head, and then say that's meeting suppose more experienced people like say Tommy and Barry and stuff who can lead you along the way. But also I'd get very frustrated myself when you be talking to some people on the streets, whether it's say be at a national protest for Palestine. You get so frustrated sometimes when you realise like sort of, but it's not their fault where people's at, because it's I suppose it's the absence of where has been the revolutionary voice in Ireland this last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you know? Like all we've really been fit off for the working class is rhetoric, you know? So, yeah, so again, going back to activism, I suppose what's the praxis? Is it, what is that? It's like the theory, it should lead the activism. But sometimes I feel it's like basically it's the activism's coming first and the theory it's secondary, where it needs to be the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I don't know if it needs to be the other way. I don't know if I'd agree with you, Paul. Sometimes the activism comes because it springs from or it's
Yeah,
inspired. It's a consequence, an outcome of having experienced injustice and oppression as well, or being a witness to it. But I think it is, I think what's really important is that we have both, because we have a lot of people, if you look even online, a lot of people who are very good on theory, but we never actually see them engaging or working or amongst the working class people who they and communities who they appear to represent in their papers and in their writings and things like that. So I suppose it's maybe about getting the balance right. Barry, I'll bring you in here, because when we're talking, I deliberately um, thought about the wording of this program tonight, and we're looking at revolutionary change. You know, that um, how important is it to consider as activists our action and how it is going to create the conditions for change? Because, like you said, Paul, some actions can be just spur of the moment. We're reacting, we're responding because we feel it's morally the right thing to do, without actually considering the outcome. What outcome? And when we talk about outcome, I think we need to remember, all of us, that outcome doesn't always mean a win. You know, that a win isn't going to come. We want this to all, just this genocide needs to end. I mean, this is naive thinking and wishful thinking, and it's thinking without the theory, Paul, without realizing that creating transformative change can be small, small changes that opens up a crack, and then we see something else that hadn't been exposed before. For instance, Stephen, last week seeing something maybe that you had to bear witness to, that to actually for it to resonate and to be able to reflect and go, well, what would be if we were to do that again? Because hindsight's a wonderful thing. What would we do differently the next time? Which is very important as activists to always reflect. And none of us, like, we'll be very good at criticizing others, but none of us are perfect or beyond criticism ourselves. We need to be able to critique each other as revolutionaries, not just as activists, as revolutionaries, and not take it personally. This is not this is not about the personal, you know, and we have to remove the ego, remove the personal side and whatever offense. This is about the cause. And I think sometimes we do lose sight of that, the big picture, the cause, and we do lose sight that every tiny crack opens up the light and shines a light on something that we maybe never even expected to see. Barry, what's your analysis, just even of Stephen's recount of last week, and then in general for all activists who are here, some people feeling exhausted, it's winter, it's very hard to keep the momentum going, I have to say, in the dark evenings, but give us a wee bit of hope.
Well, I think what Stephen and them did was a really great action, because you could say that they denied you and they didn't do anything, they stonewalled and done all of that. But that's good. That in fact is good, because it exposes the system. I mean, some of us may realise that was inevitable, but an awful lot of people out there wouldn't. They would think that when they'd ask a decent, honest question, that they would get a decent and honest answer. But what Stephen experienced was the might of the state, was the lopsidedness of power, and also the politics. I mean, it was the politics of that meeting that was very important. And the politics were that all of those people couldn't say anything about anything in relation to genocide or to the Shannon airport or Palestine, because they were going to have to they were immediately confronted by their own politics. So it's important that things like that happen all the time. And there are all kinds of events and activism that revolutionary and radical activists should be watching and be prepared to do what Stephen done. It's important, as Paul pointed out, that you approach it from that direction. That you have in your mind, how do we expose imperialism here? How do we expose capitalism and the agents of capitalism? And, where does this fit in the class struggle? Because that's what it's about at the end of the day. And even an action like the revival of the Irish language, that is in effect an anti-imperialist action. It mightn't sound like that, and it mightn't sound like an invasion of Shannon Airport or worse. Sounds great, but the reality is that if suddenly half or 3/4 of the Irish nation was beginning to speak Irish and wasn't interested in the language of English, that creates a problem, and it creates an identity. It renews and reaffirms the Irish identity, and it can be implicated with an opposition to imperialism, because it was imperialism at the end of the day that destroyed our language and culture. So activism takes many forms, but activism on its own is just that, activism. And theory on its own is just theory. Neither of the two, separately or individually, as Paul pointed out, is of any advantage. So unless there's a practice of the two things coming together and one gating the other, and as you point out, feedback, questioning, critiquing of each other, critiquing of strategies, all of that is the necessary prerequisites to developing and building an organization that can oppose the system that we're up against. Because remember, they use a lot of stuff. They have used education very successfully. They've also used religion very successfully. They've also used the media very successfully. They use employment very successfully, because you could be sacked for being out in the street protesting against something. So there's 4 major things in people's lives that the state uses against them. They don't even realize they use them against them. So this thing of actions and resistance is much more complex than just going out in the street and holding a banner. Yes, that's an important thing to do, absolutely, and it's necessary, because it lets people begin to express their opposition to what's been done in their name. But ultimately, we have to be able to translate all of those type of resistances into a more organised, people-powered, decentralised democracy in Ireland. And that's what we should be. That's one of the main things. It's not talked enough about. We talk about activism, we talk about all sorts of things, but we don't talk that much about democracy, because democracy is kind of associated with power, and we don't like to talk about that. But the reality is that we should be working towards a decentralised democracy, a people's decentralised democracy, people-driven, from the bottom up decentralised democracy. But that will take time, but it needs to start. It needs to start somewhere. Somebody needs to set up a local people's assembly and start working on an issue. And bit by bit, there's one in some part of Dublin, there's one in another part, and then there's one in Navan, and then there's one in Kells, and there's one in Cavan, and that's it. That's the reality. So the other thing about the Palestinian thing is that we have to be conscious of all the time. And any events like that, as far as activism is concerned, these things will pass. The Palestinian thing will pass. One way or another, it'll pass. And we need to be in for the long haul. We need to understand that our rationale for being on the streets and our rationale for being opposing imperialism and capitalism is to set up a new Ireland, to set up a socialist republic, a workers' republic. And anything that we can do and internationalise or otherwise, we need to be a part of it. And we certainly, most certainly need to be part of people's lives at every level, anywhere we can. That's activism too.
Absolutely. It's not something that we can compartmentalize. And I think the more involved we are, the more we realize that, you know, it's not a hobby, it is a commitment. And I think we start to realize that the committed are those who are people with conviction, actually, and then who are interested in the theory and the action as well, and combining both. You know, very few children are born with a revolutionary theory book. They certainly wouldn't get it in school. It just leads me, I want to open this up to the floor a wee bit to others who might like to come in, but I suppose the big question is how can collective action, because all of us here, I imagine, we're all activists. We haven't all worked together. Some of us have, some of us know each other, but the big question is how can collective action move from just protesting to transformation as well? And I'm not saying that the protest doesn't create transformative conditions. It does, but how do we work together a bit more coherently and with a bit more clarity? Because sometimes it does feel like there are a lot of things, and if you're in different WhatsApp groups, you see a lot of different things happening on any given day. Part of you feels, oh God, I'd like to be at that, I wish I was at that, but then you're also trying to organize yourself and sustain something. So even to have a sustained campaign, people just drop off because they maybe get a wee bit fed up, especially in the winter time when activism on the streets, you know, is a wee bit harder in the rain and in the cold. How do we become a broader collective? And that's open up to the floor. If nobody wants to come in, or you don't have to answer that question, but comment even. Thibaut, it would be great to hear from you. Go ahead and unmute.
Right. The Refagramina Mahawiv again, always a pleasure. The first of these that I attended back over a year ago now was on this very topic, actually, on the efficacy of activism, particularly the strategy of, not even necessarily the IPSE, but just demonstrating for Palestine, because we still had to contend with the fact that it was still tens of thousands of people in the country mobilizing, and mobilized in a way that we hadn't seen since, at least in the Free State, the water charges movement here. And now I would say the Palestine movement, unlike the water charges, I would not describe it yet as a mass movement, a proper mass movement that like really has like the entirety of the masses or the working class like consistently engaged with kind of one clear, simple goal of just stopping this regressive tax. Nevertheless, the Palestine movement in Ireland does remain the biggest mobilizer of people in Ireland. The second biggest one then is, to an extent, unfortunately, asylum seeking or immigration, or I guess by proxy of that, a lot of other kind of more vaguely anti-establishment, anti-government proxy issues that are often expressed in those manner. And I suppose I was wondering myself, like, where do we go from here in terms of, like, first kind of overcoming that or dealing with that reality? Because I'm sure we also do come across a lot of activism that we would look at and say, why are you doing this? Why this is a waste of time? Like there's a particular festival coming up in UCD now, which I'm sure we could ask that question to a lot of its attendees, where you're just like what are you doing this? It's like either one, it's a waste of time, or two, sometimes it's even out and out counterproductive. But I do feel that there's some parallels between the IPSC and the Stop the War Coalition over in Britain, in that the national leadership of these organizations, like the IPSC itself or the Stop the War, very, very flawed. I have a lot of critiques at them, and at times can wonder if they are even actually your adversaries. However, the different branches or constituencies that make up that organization, those are real organizations. Those are vibrant organizations. Like those are the IPSC branches that are around. Like they're made up of real people who are really dedicated, really active, people who've never been involved before, but who now every Sunday will do a vigil, every Saturday will attend a demonstration, every Wednesday will stand on a bridge with a flag and endeavor to do other things that they can, and in an activist's like term. So it's like there really is something there, like with Palestine and Ireland, where might not be as mass or as big as the water charges movement. However, people have stuck at it for longer, and I do get the sense from a lot of the people there, a lot of them with families, it's like they feel like that they're in for the long haul with this for Palestine, where they have the goal of freeing that. But I suppose in terms of answering the question, for me, my perspective, I would say always a good start is being able to develop capacities for like parallel power structures that can actually effectively challenge the state, but also provide the safety and reassurance for the working class that we are looking to engage. And for me, the best vehicles that we found for that would be unions and tenants unions, things like CATU in particular, Community Action Tenants Union, which really is, in our cases in Cork and North Cork, like revitalising an interest in wanting to struggle and fight back, to demand and to agitate for better living conditions. And I would think similarly with kind of more militant class-based trade unions. But that'd be my answer to that. Very glad to hear of the thing that Stephen went to. I fear that even if I could find some domestic Irish law that the DPP had broken, or a precedent or a case, it very likely would have just fallen on deaf ears and you would have gotten the same response. And judging by the reception you got from the law lecturers there, either they themselves wouldn't have challenged it, or they also would have reacted in a similar fashion. Unfortunately, I find with the legal profession and in academia, in a case of whether it's ignorance or malice, it's almost always certainly the latter. In the legal profession, with very, very, very few exceptions, one notably Frank McGuinness, it's hard to find good people and good, genuine people here. And great to hear Barry talk about Irish itself and the revitalization of it being an anti-imperialist action, because in a way that it almost is and it would be, and it's good that Connolly is forceful about like revitalizing that, because there was by proxy part of the smear campaign an attempt to portray Gael Gories as like imposing and wanting to just bully everyone, have their own way, or make people feel silly and stupid. And you know, they don't believe that, they don't believe those critiques they were hand dishing out to her, but it does speak to like how scared they are and what they're about. And I guess with what Paul was getting at with activism following theory, I think I understand what you meant, in the sense that even if you do activism first, well, then if you go on to delve into theory, then your activism should follow like the theory that you've read. So it's like you'd expect to have some kind of change, or you know, you would expect there to be some transformation in how this person does their activism or does their organizing within theory, to show that, you know, they do understand what the proper tools are and are thus enacting out their practices and their activism accordingly. And that kind of speaks to what Tommy was saying at the start about this being a long endeavor, the longevity of it. Like, it's a long process, it's a grueling process. You likely won't see results or big transformations like even in your lifetime. But that is the work to be done to kind of lay the groundwork for this lay the groundwork for those after us to then take that step, then lay the groundwork for the next generation, then the next generation to take that step. So yeah, it's a good reflection, and this point in time was great to have this reflection on activism and organising. And a pleasure as always, Gorman and Mahagwith.
Gormila Mayagad Tibo, thank you. Always very coherent and even in being able to sum up our panelists and their contributions. I see someone else here. I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, SC. You have your hand up if you want to join in.
Hey, sorry. My name's Joanne. I'm just logged in on a different account to my own. Yeah, my answer would be to bring in food and farming. I actually ended up on the Zoom call kind of like last minute. Yeah, because I saw it through Rupa Maria's Instagram, and I actually like met Rupa through like Cultivate and Clock Jordan, Talvbio, Ollie Moore, and it was when I was in Clock Jordan at the Feeding Ourselves gathering earlier in the year that I heard him talk about his time in Palestine and with UAC, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees. And then that was my step into activism for Palestine, because then I got him up to Donegal, and we had this amazing fundraiser and raised like thousands, and I'm still continuing to use the iDonate platform to gather funds to keep sending them directly to UAC. So that's really great, but it's all very grounded in food and farming as well, and food sovereignty. So yeah, like on the one hand, taken to the streets on the warmer months, but then I think it would be nice over winter to be thinking about, you know, like when we talk about like a workers' Ireland, what are the jobs that we're doing, and are they connected to the land, and are they regenerative and rooted in care, so that we're building these new systems? Yeah, that's all I kind of have. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say for now.
Well, you're welcome here, Joanne, and I hope you come back. We had the pleasure of hosting Rupa a good few months ago. Well, that sounds very bourgeois, doesn't it? We had the pleasure of hosting, but you know what I mean. She was here and she was great, and that was before she'd moved to Ireland. And I think that's a conversation I really think we need to have, is about sovereign. You know, when we're talking about sovereignty, which is very important. We talk about sovereignty and decolonizing, like decolonizing the brain, but looking at how sovereignty of the land, our food as well, and how we're going to build to sustain ourselves. And we have to talk about food sovereignty. We have to know how to do it. I mean, we have so many resources, but the problem is we need to take those resources back from the imperialists, first of all, whether that's the sea, our rivers, you know, the land. Look at the state of forestation in this country. It's awful. You know, they call it the forest, you know, reforesting, and all it is monocultures that absolutely destroy biodiversity and create these eco crises. So it would be lovely to have you back, maybe and maybe Mara as well will join you. Thank you for contributing. Very important. I'd like to, Sean, I see you here, and I know it's soon time to wrap up. Sorry to put you on the spot. But Sean, I'm always looking with activist envy at what you're doing up in Belfast, going, how does he do that? Hey, tell us a wee bit about what you do, because you're brilliant.
Well, obviously, I'm Sean, if anybody doesn't know me, from West Belfast here, Beachpoint. Listen, I run a project, Beachfoot Riders Collective, and it has a multiple of different things going on. There's only 4 or 5 of us running it, really. A lot of us are in full-time work, except for myself, so I spearhead a lot of it. But just going back with the girl said there, she was speaking there. What is important is they're learning people how to grow food. Is that we liberated a bit of land ourselves. We won it here. Looks like it in the court, but we liberated to put a bit of a growing beds and basically just so we could really take back a wee bit of action ourselves and learning ourselves how to grow, because none of us knew how to do it. So it was a wee bit of insight, like we took a wee idea from the likes of Paul McAdams as well, that had a collective a couple of years back. I don't know whether some of you know of that also up on the farm that he had, but that idea came from that. So we basically adapted it and used it. But the important thing is it brings people together, but also educating them on the food. But also while you're talking about that, you talk about class issues, talk about what's going on in your area. So it's a major thing to be doing. Like sometimes people laugh at you, like you're only growing spuds and things, but it's not. You're actually it's making a connection with what some of our ancestors might have been doing, and stuff like that. So it does. You can feel it too, and while you're doing it and while you're active. But the most important thing also is the grassroots approach. It needs to come from the ground. Understanding also the layout as well. In Belfast, how powers that be tries to take down groups like ourselves, but you have to overcome them things to keep moving forward. But another important issue is we need unity. If we don't have unity within all the groups, between community groups and political parties and whatever, like it's so hard. Like, and I've got many experience of. I don't want to bore everybody now, like, but I've been through the mills through some stuff, and some people know aware of it, and it's all coming from the state. Like, if it's not the PSN, if it's not the PSNI, it's coming from the powers that be that says to serve us when they don't. Like, so, but no, important thing is unity, and I think that's why I came to this chat too. Seeing what you were talking about, and I thought I might pop my head in this and hang, because I've been lost for a couple of weeks there just with everything else going on with myself. But I think it's important for these discussions, and I think we should be doing this more often. And also, Roisin, I think you're doing brilliant work there, and I think something like this should be brought to all over Ireland and talks for people to come in person. So I think it'll be an RB idea for you maybe in the future.
Thank you, Sean. Just lovely that you came in just after Joanne. Is it Joanne? Yeah. Just on that, that's a coincidence that Joanne, you were talking about Clock Jordan and Rupa. I don't know if you know of Rupa Maria. Sean, look her up on Instagram. But even about the medicine of, like I suppose Aristotle said, let food be thy, was it Aristotle? Let food be thy medicine. That they say, and it's a class issue because we are what we consume as well. Like, I mean, we just, when the money's low and you're tight for money and everything's about convenience. This is a capitalist system, like eat cheap food, and it's not even that cheap. And then we become sick, and then you have big pharma of obviously capitalizing on that. So it is all very much linked. But you are doing great work, Sean, and you're right. Sometimes, I feel sometimes it can be lonely if we don't have some unity, even things like this coming together. There's a solidarity in this, and then an awakening of the many forms of activism. There isn't just one perfect type of activist or activism. There are many ways to create conditions for transformation, and that's ultimately, and I think we have to be realistic. We can't expect that transformation to happen overnight. And once we start to realize, make sure that our expectations are a wee bit more realistic, we don't get downhearted, we don't let despair creep in, then we have the resilience to keep going. I see Michelle with your hand up. Michelle, go ahead if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, hi there everyone, and Roisin, especially Dave. Just on the last conversation we had, there was and there's so many wonderful points that have come up, about sovereignty over our food. I suppose I just want to say something about language and hope. So today, I suppose I missed the first part of your meeting. Sorry, I was on another call, but Catherine Connolly was inaugurated, and I listened to her speech and it was so powerful. And, when I came out of school today, when I had brought her name up in the staff room, it was like lead balloon almost, and I'm thinking of a particular phrase, I can't remember who said it, but even in relation to Palestine, one day everyone will have been against it. And I feel like we're part of this massive movement. And I think of even groups like Mothers Against Genocide, where the ordinary mothers, the and young mothers, because I'm a teacher and we didn't get this education at school. And that's why I think meetings like tonight and people, you talked about the theory, but also last week, if you remember, or the last meeting we had, I mentioned about Catherine Connolly, they referred to her literally the day before voting as a communist, but it was said, it was weaponized in such a way that it was like breeding fear into people, and we were bred that in schools, and it's, I think it's a bit like our Changa, we have to and she said this, Tirgan Changa, Tirgan Anam today, which is so powerful. And it's like there's a reclaiming happening, a reclaiming of our and language, to be a Republican, to be a nationalist, that is what we should be, and to understand what language, I suppose, means, and what socialism even means, again, I think there's a huge piece around education and language. And when we talk about unity, I'm kind of going against what I'm saying now, but I'll give you just the context here. The Mater Hospital, this is in relation to, the standard for Gaza and wearing Palestinian badges or stuff like that. They were told in the Mater Hospital that they weren't allowed, they were sent an email to have no Palestinian badges that were facing towards the patients. So the Nace Hospital, another example, I go to that demo and they're outside and they were told they couldn't wear their scrubs outside. And yet wearing the scrubs is very much their uniform. And it's very, very powerful to see people in scrubs like that outside, because people, we're still normalizing it, which is horrendous to say after 2 years, but we are. And in schools, I spoke to this last week in terms of the standout, or the last meeting, sorry, the standout for Gaza date, the next generation are so consumed by their phones and their brains are fried, to be frank. And even with AI, I feel it's like they're going to be putting their brains in jars. And I know it's a huge generalization, but when a lot of us have seen this, people of my age have seen this because we are now on social media more and we've seen what it's actually done to us. And I suppose from my own experience, just coming back to social justice, like people come into movements and activism in different ways. And I think in embracing, I like the way Roisin said to me once, we're all learning, and sometimes we see the people who can stand up and speak really well as being all knowing. But it's so important, that knowledge is shared because, as I said, we didn't get it in schools. And I think there's this huge movement now for system change. And people are seeing the connectedness between climate change and so much more, And when you talked about sovereignty and sovereignty over our food, so many of the Tiva products have been recalled recently because they're carcinogenic. And it's people waking up to that. But there's not a lot of people too, they hear it, but it's like they don't want to hear it either. They want to stay in their little comfort bubble. Sorry, I've gone on a bit off track there, but I just think these meetings are powerful and I think they serve as a way to educate. And even if we don't always agree with each other perspectives are really important because everyone's on their phones. No one really talks to each other anymore in the same way. And that piece that was said about unity, connection, and I think a universal language, and the point that I wanted to make, but that was when groups were told, and they have been, and in my school I was told Palestine can stay inside the staff room but not outside it. Dr. Sarah Taff has these new badges that say human rights for all. I believe in human rights, sorry. So I think, actually that's what it's about, it's about creating a better world. And actually it's a language that everyone can understand, a language where people are equal and, we're fighting for our children and our children's children, so I just want to give hope, I suppose, because I see that movement, and it's how to harness it, keep it united. And, you know, human rights for all is a language that everyone can understand. And I don't know, theory wise, when you were talking about theory and the praxis there, you know, sometimes language can distance people and can alienate people. And it's how do we keep the language simple without dumbing it down, you know, or diluting the message. That's really, yeah. So sorry, I get my
No,
point.
Michelle, it's
Yeah.
always great to hear you. I know sometimes you come in just at the end, and I think, oh, we should give a whole program over to you, Michelle. Maybe you will come and be, you know, because what you say makes perfect sense. And I think, I think it's a fair point to say that quite often those who have the theoretical, the reading, the knowledge, the understanding, they get a little bit caught up in the language, and if it doesn't translate to, or you know, to, if our message is so theoretical that it alienates people, well then it's counterproductive. So it's really important to be able to speak um on terms where people understand us. I mean, if we get up like highfalutin talking and all knowing and all omniscient ones, you really drive people away. And I think, well, I've maybe been guilty of that even sometimes. So it's we do need to be checked, and that's why meeting together and reminding each other of, you know, and checking our own behavior is really, really important without taking taking it personally or taking offence. Sean, come on ahead in there. You have your hand up.
No, I just wanted to touch base on what you were saying, what was said there about the language. Like what I find, like especially in Belfast, with there's a lot of division going on, as we know, with the north and south. And every time you use language like revolution or thing, people start to like look at you like if you have 20 heads and you're going like like if you talk, even if you talk about like Che Guevara or the Cuban Revolution, people start going like people are buying into the West Brit sort of way of thinking of thing. How do we tackle that? That's a serious thing for activists. It's designed to put pressure on activists and groups, I believe, but it's definitely a thing that we need to have workshops on or something. How do we overcome that and how do we tackle it without, because we don't need more division. What we need to do is win people back, get them on the our stage, because some people are lost, and you're seeing that there, especially in Belfast, like I'm watching it unfold, especially in my own community. So I think it's an important thing there. If a collective could get together for that, I'm up for that talk.
Yeah, that's a good topic to talk about. How do we, you know, in our language and our messaging as well, that we don't push people further away. But I think the fault lies, you've named it there. You find the cause of the problem, Sean. It is because the brain has been so colonized. I think we don't even realize it ourselves, that through the education system, through everything that we consume, the way that we read, interpret, and understand the world is through that imperialist lens, which is why I think it's important that we always, when we come together, that we analyze things through an anti-imperialist lens. And by doing that, you know, we're trying to tip the balance back over again. I don't mean to our side, but at least, you know, to create an alternative way of seeing the world and understanding the world, and a better way of living it, where we have genuine equality. So, you know, I often accuse academics of speaking like gobbledygook and a different language, and I'm like, you know, be reading a paper saying just speak plainly. But you know, we have to mirror that ourselves and speak plainly. And I do think the group of people that we have here, and that's why you know, this panelists are carefully chosen with Tommy and Paul and Barry. I think you can't get any more plain speaking, you know, very, very clear way to be able to identify, and it's important to have panelists like you here, so thank you very much. Michelle, if you your hand up again, would you like to speak, or is it up from the last time?
Yeah, it was just to say it's not what I was saying wasn't really a criticism, because I think it's so important that we that the language, there's appropriate language in every subject. And, I suppose if you were to take it even with teaching, like, you do people a disservice by not using the language of your profession, but you have to explain it in a way that people understand, but not be afraid to use the language of the subject either. Like we do
Yeah.
it, so it has to be taught in a way. Where I was coming from, I suppose, was that to find a unifying language, like human rights for all, is something everyone can buy into. And from there, we have the discussion, from there comes, well, why is that not the case? And I think that's why Palestine, it really has opened people up to look at the power systems in the world, and even, who controls the world, the money, how everything, the systems are set up as they are. Yeah, anyway, I'm talking to people who know a lot more about this than me, but you know what I'm saying? I just want to make the point, it wasn't a criticism. I think there's a balance, like I think it's what you were saying, Roisin, and I think it's really powerful to hear people speak with authority and have the language of that subject, because that's the way we learn, anyway, there. So
You're
thank you.
quite right.
These
Like,
questions are great. Yeah. And to own it, I suppose, to own it. Yeah.
And not to be afraid to use it.
Yeah.
And not to be afraid when we don't understand something. That's what learning is about. What does that actually mean? That we'd learn from each other. Like I still attend reading groups, because there's so much that I still need to learn, and to give me more confidence actually to speak and to see and to analyze more authentically as well, rather than trying to figure it out. I think that's where we're really lucky to have Tommy and Barry here, and to have that experience both of practical experience, but the deep learning and the reading that both, I know, Tommy and Barry have done. It's really, really important for you to pass that on to us as well. I think we have to pick the books up ourselves too and read them. We can't just say, give me the the revision version, Barry, there of that big fat book. Barry makes you read it all, and then he gives you a wee test at the end of it to make sure you did read it before you give him the book back. But it's really great actually, because it keeps me on my toes, Barry.
Anyway,
yeah. So those kind of reading groups are important as well, as long as we don't get bogged down in all of the theory and it turns into nothing, except that we turn into those kind of bloody professors that I'm always giving out about, talking gobbledygook. Look, it's nearly Barry, you have your hand up. Yeah, no harm to let Barry have the last word. This is the status quo now.
I was just going to say that, in relation to learning, on Sean's point, that the thing of it is that, we're looking at the idea of reading novels, just novels, but interpreting them from a more progressive left perspective. And you can do that, and it teaches you, it's an easy way to sort of learn. A book that you like, or a popular book, for example, can be used. And then, you can learn a different angle. And once you sort of learn that, then you begin to see things in a different way. You can't unlearn it. So I mean, that type of thing is important, and I think it should be done. And I think that, if we manage to get this wee group up and running here in the wintertime, that we'll send out invitations to anybody who wants to join and see how it goes.
Great idea. Great.
And certainly, Sean, if you're still there listening, we need to link up. Certainly link up with the Father Donald Social Republican Forum, and we're all for discussion and education and bringing groups together as much as we possibly can. Not always successfully though, but however, we keep trying. So that's it, really.
Thank you, Barry. Like, Sean, you'll have to pay a visit up to Fermanagh, because you won't need to liberate any land up in Belfast. Barry's got acres of land that you can sow spuds in. I love that phrase. I love the use of the verb liberate. Liberate the land, Sean. It's beautiful. You're not muted, Sean. What are you saying? Or you are muted, sorry. Could you unmute? Yeah.
Is that me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Just getting used to this. No, I would love to go up the bar again. I was up years ago, and I'm just asking, was I allowed back? It was all good.
You can do plenty of sewing. It's actually the sewing's the easy part. It's
You're
the
welcome
digging
anytime.
hardest.
100%.
Sean, sowing the seeds of revolution.
Exactly.
More than planting spuds.
Now you're talking, Paul. And on that happy, positive note of hope for revolution, thank you, everybody. I want to say thanks, Stephen, because you were the prompt. Sort of gave me a push. I've been sick for a wee while, but talking to you, hearing about, as Barry said, what you experienced, what you did, was really important, and opening up that crack and then being able to share it with us, to show and to reveal how the forces of the state or the tools of imperialism actually look and behave, even when they are letting on to be agents for democracy, that there's no such thing as Q&A, really. It's all very controlled. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to our panelists, and thanks to Sean, come back, and Joanne as well. I don't know if you're still here. Lovely to see new faces, and keep coming back. Let's keep talking. Slán go fáil.
Slán.
Dánach spanna ar mágad.
Slán.